The sun was a brilliant golden orb in a pristine blue sky, pouring its warmth onto the manicured lawns and freshly painted fences of Elmwood Avenue. For Lena Williams, this was more than just good weather. It was the perfect backdrop to a perfect moment of peace. The scent of freshly cut grass hung in the air, mingling with the rich, damp earth from her garden. Her hands, clad in worn gardening gloves, moved with a practiced ease among her prize-winning roses and vibrant hydrangeas. A soft, cheerful hum escaped her lips, a old jazz melody her grandfather used to play on his saxophone. This ritual, this quiet communion with her garden, was her therapy. This house, this yard, this life, it was their sanctuary. For her husband, Marcus, a decorated Navy SEAL currently on a precious 3-month leave after a grueling deployment, every moment here was a treasure. After years of sacrifice, of missed birthdays and silent holidays, of conversations held over crackling satellite connections, they had carved out their hard-earned slice of the American dream. The home represented stability, safety, and a future they were building together, brick by brick, flower by flower. Every blade of grass Marcus mowed was a meditation on normalcy. Every bloom Lena nurtured was a promise of beauty and calm. The peace was so profound that the sound, when it came, was not just an interruption but a violation. It began as a low, aggressive rumble that quickly crescendoed into a deafening roar. An oversized, lifted pickup truck, its diesel engine snarling and its chrome grille gleaming like a predator's teeth, screeched to a halt directly at their curb, spraying a shower of loose gravel across the edge of their immaculate lawn. The engine coughed and died, leaving a ringing silence that felt more threatening than the noise. The doors swung open. 2 men stepped out, and the scene immediately felt wrong. They wore uniforms that suggested security, but the fabric was cheap, wrinkled, and ill-fitting. One shirt strained over a substantial paunch, the sleeves of the other were too short, revealing thick tattooed forearms. Their postures were not of officials on duty, but of aggressors marking territory. Their eyes, hidden behind cheap sunglasses, scanned the Williams property, not with an assessor's eye, but with a sense of arrogant ownership they hadn't earned and didn't deserve. They marched up the driveway with a purposefully heavy tread, their boots crunching on the pavement. They bypassed the cheerful, "Welcome, friends," mat, as if it were a protest sign, their attention laser-focused on Lena. A cold chill, completely unrelated to the pleasant weather, traced a path down Lena's spine. She slowly stood up, setting her watering can down. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice steady, belying the sudden quickening of her pulse. She made a conscious effort to keep her tone polite but cautious, a skill honed from years as a military spouse navigating unfamiliar situations. The larger of the 2 men, a hulking figure with a close-shaved head and a permanent sneer etched on his face, didn't bother with greetings. He jabbed a thick finger toward a single, slightly overgrown shrub near the property line, a plant Lena was intentionally letting bush out for privacy. "HOA violation," he grunted, his voice a low rasp. "Yard isn't up to community standards. We're issuing a fine. $250. Payable now." Lena's internal alarm bells, already softly ringing, now clanged loudly. The real HOA corresponded via formal letters and emails, not spot inspections with demands for immediate cash. She squared her shoulders slightly, drawing on a well of strength she always had for when Marcus was away. "I see," she said calmly. "I wasn't aware of any changes to the landscaping bylaws. Could I please see your official HOA identification, and a printed copy of the specific bylaw you're citing would be helpful." The request, reasonable and measured, seemed to anger them. The sneer on the large man's face deepened. "Identification." "We are the identification," the second man, thinner and weaselier, chimed in, stepping closer. "The standard is what we say it is. Now, are you going to pay the fine, or do we have a problem?" The conversation escalated in seconds, spiraling from a disagreeable interaction into a full-blown confrontation. Their language grew coarser, their threats less veiled. They loomed over her, using their size to intimidate. Lena knew then these were not officials. They were bullies. Her fear began to curdle into anger, but her primary instinct was to get to Marcus. He was home. He was safety. "I need to speak with my husband," she stated firmly, turning to go inside. It was the wrong move in their eyes. As she turned, the larger man's hand shot out, his meaty fingers closing like a vice around her bare forearm. The grip was painfully tight, meant to detain and inflict discomfort. "We're not done here," he snarled. Instinct took over. Lena yanked her arm back with a sharp twist, pulling herself free from his grasp. The man's face contorted in rage at her defiance. He stepped forward, his body blocking her path to the door. Time seemed to slow, then snap forward with brutal speed. His open hand swung through the air, not a fist, but a wide, contemptuous slap meant to humiliate as much as hurt. The impact cracked through the quiet afternoon, a sound as sharp and shocking as a gunshot. Lena's head snapped to the side. A stinging, white-hot pain bloomed across her cheek, bringing immediate, involuntary tears to her eyes. The world swam for a second, the vibrant colors of her garden blurring into a nauseating swirl. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her face, feeling the already rising heat of the bruise. The cheerful humming, the scent of cut grass, the warmth of the sun, it had all been violently shattered, replaced by the taste of copper in her mouth and the cold, terrifying realization of what had just happened. The sanctuary had been breached. Inside, the house was a cocoon of cool, shadowed silence, a stark contrast to the bright sun outside. Marcus Williams was deep in the recuperative sleep of a man who had spent too many recent nights on hard ground, listening for threats in the dark. His leave was a sacred time, a period for his nervous system to dial down from a constant state of high alert to something resembling civilian life. The raised voices from the driveway didn't fully wake him at first. They were merely incorporated into a fading dream. But the tone, aggressive, masculine, and utterly unfamiliar, acted like a splash of cold water on his psyche. His training, drilled into him through countless simulations and real-world scenarios, didn't allow for a groggy transition. One moment he was asleep, the next his senses were online, processing data with terrifying speed. His eyes opened, taking in the familiar ceiling of his bedroom, but his ears were pointed toward the window, filtering the sounds. It wasn't a friendly, neighborly debate. It was a confrontation. The cadence was all wrong, demanding, condescending, threatening. He moved from the bed to the window with a fluid, silent grace that belied his powerful frame. The scene below unfolded before him like a nightmare. Two large men in cheap uniforms looming over Lena, his Lena, who stood her ground but was visibly cornered. He saw the body language, the puffed chests, the invasive proximity, the finger jabbing. His own body tensed, every muscle coiling. And then he saw it. The larger man's hand, a meaty paw, closing around his wife's slender arm. The act was so violating, so possessive, that a red haze flickered at the edge of his vision. He was already moving toward the door, a predator descending the stairs, when the second violation occurred. The man's hand swung. The sound of the slap was a dry, sickening crack that carried through the glass as if it were right next to him. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow to Marcus's own soul. The peaceful sanctuary of his home, the woman he loved more than life itself, had been physically assaulted on her own property. A primal rage, colder and more focused than any fire, ignited within him. This was not the hot, blinding anger of a bar fight. This was the arctic, calculating fury of a protector whose sole purpose has been triggered. It was a rage that sharpened his senses instead of dulling them. The front door flew open with such force that it slammed against the exterior wall, the report echoing the slap, a twin sound of violence that announced his arrival before the screen door had even finished its shuddering swing. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't charge out like a madman. He simply emerged. He became the doorframe, filling it completely, a statue of controlled fury carved from granite and resolve. At 6 feet 2 inches, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun, he was an imposing figure. But it wasn't just his size, it was the posture. The way he held himself, perfectly balanced, every movement economical and precise, telegraphed a lethal competence. This was a man who knew exactly how to use his body as both a shield and a weapon. The entire atmosphere of the driveway shifted. The space that moments before had felt dominated by the two imposters now seemed to shrink, constricting around them. The two men, who had been towering over a now stunned Lena, physically recoiled. Their aggressive stances deflated. The larger man actually took a half-step back, his sneer replaced by a flicker of surprise and, for the first time, fear. They were looking at a different kind of man than they were used to intimidating. "Take your hands off my wife. Now." Marcus's voice was low, a quiet, guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ground they stood on. It carried more palpable threat than any scream ever could. It was the sound of promised consequences. The men's hands, which had been clenched into fists, opened. They stammered, tripping over their own words as they tried to desperately reassemble their shattered facade of authority. "We're with the HOA," the thinner one began, his voice cracking. "You're in violation of—" Marcus's eyes, glacial and unwavering, never left them. He didn't need to look away to know his wife. "Lena," he said, his tone shifting infinitesimally, layering concern over the fury. "Are you okay, baby?" "Look at me, Lena." Her hand still pressed to her stinging cheek, met his gaze and gave a small, shaky nod. That was all he needed. His focus returned to the men, now sharpened to a razor's edge. "Okay," Marcus said, the word deceptively calm. "Let's talk about the HOA." He began to ask questions, his voice flat and interrogative. "What's the name of the current HOA president?" A simple question any real official would know instantly. The men exchanged a panicked glance. "It's, Johnson?" the larger one offered hesitantly. "First name?" Marcus pressed, his voice like a tightening vice. Silence. "What's the specific number of the bylaw you're citing?" "I'd like to look it up." Another basic, reasonable request. "It's the one about the shrubs," the Weasleyer man mumbled, waving a vague hand. "The number," Marcus repeated, each syllable dropping like a stone. Their answers became a pathetic mess of contradictions and stutters. They couldn't name the property management company. They couldn't produce any ID beyond a generic security badge with no name or affiliation. The lie was unraveling in real time under the cold, relentless pressure of his questioning. It was suddenly, painfully obvious. These weren't HOA officials. They were bullies, likely local thugs who had identified new residents, perhaps assuming they were an easy target, and had decided to try a shakedown, using the guise of authority to intimidate and extort. They had chosen their mark, and they had chosen catastrophically wrong. The air on the Williams driveway, once thick with the scent of roses and cut grass, was now charged with the metallic tang of fear and adrenaline. The two imposters stood frozen, their cheap authority utterly vaporized under Marcus's glacial, interrogating gaze. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals are at their most dangerous and most stupid. The larger man, the one whose hand had left a livid mark on Lena's cheek, was sweating profusely. His face, once a mask of arrogant contempt, was now a blotchy canvas of panic and humiliation. He had been exposed as a fraud in front of his partner and his intended victim, and his brittle ego couldn't withstand the fracture. Seeing their entire scheme crumble into dust, His primitive fight-or-flight response short-circuited directly into a catastrophic, prideful lunge. It was the second-worst mistake of his day. With a guttural roar that was more fear than fury, he threw a wild, telegraphed haymaker aimed at Marcus's head. For an ordinary man, it might have been a dangerous blow. For a Navy SEAL, a master of close-quarters battle who trained daily against faster, stronger, and more skilled opponents, it was like watching a scene unfold in agonizing slow motion. Marcus's world did not narrow with panic. It expanded with hyper-clarity. His mind processed 1,000 data points at once. The man's weight distribution was forward, his back foot was leaving the ground, his other hand was dropping, leaving his entire center line exposed. It was the punch of a brawler, not a fighter. Marcus didn't retreat. He didn't flinch. He moved with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful in its lethal precision. His left forearm came up not to block but to deflect, redirecting the incoming force of the punch inward and past his head with an effortless, almost gentle motion. It used the man's own momentum against him, spinning him slightly off balance. The man's face registered a split second of shock as his fist connected with nothing but air, his body overcommitted and vulnerable. That vulnerability was all the invitation Marcus needed. The time for questions was over. This was now a clear and present threat to his safety and that of his wife. His response was not one of rage, but of professional necessity. It was a clinical neutralization. Pivoting on the balls of his feet, he generated power from the ground up, hips twisting, core engaging, shoulder driving forward. His right fist, held not in a wild swing but in a tight, perfect form, shot forward like a piston. It wasn't aimed at the nose or the mouth, it was aimed at the button, the precise point on the jaw that, when struck correctly, disrupts the brain's connection to the body. The impact was not a dull thud, but a sharp, sickening crack that echoed with finality in the quiet street. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The man's eyes rolled back into his head, showing only the whites. Every ounce of tension and aggression drained from his body as his nervous system simply shut down. He collapsed straight down, his knees buckling bonelessly, and hit the pristine concrete of the driveway with the dead weight of a sack of stones. He was unconscious before his head bounced once and came to rest, a dark pool of blood already beginning to seep from a split lip onto the gray pavement. He would not be getting up. The entire sequence, from the deflected punch to the devastating counter, had taken less than 2 seconds. A profound, deafening silence descended, broken only by the distant chirping of a bird. The second man, the weaselly one who had been so vocal moments before, stood utterly paralyzed. His brain struggled to process the violence and the speed of what had just happened. His partner, the intimidating brute he had relied upon, had been rendered a non-entity in the blink of an eye. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him with the force of a tidal wave. He was alone with a man who was clearly a trained weapon, and he had just participated in assaulting that man's wife. His hands shot into the air so fast it was as if they were spring-loaded, a universal and desperate signal of surrender. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror, his eyes wide and pleading. "Don't! Please, don't!" he squealed, his voice cracking with panic. "I surrender!" "We're sorry. It was his idea. Please, I'm done. He took a stumbling step backward, his hands still high, his body trembling uncontrollably. He posed less than zero threat. He was a puppet with its strings cut, consumed by the primal understanding that he was entirely at the mercy of the calm, deadly serious man standing before him. From the initial swing to the final surrender, the entire physical confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. It was a masterclass in controlled, defensive violence. There had been no unnecessary blows, no continued assault. The threat had been identified, measured, and neutralized with surgical efficiency. Marcus stood over the unconscious form, his breathing still even, his eyes now fixed on the second man, ensuring his continued compliance. The transition was seamless. The protector had done his job, now the professional would take over. The fight was over. The aftermath
While the
was
one
about to
conscious
begin.
imposter cowered, his hands still held high in a gesture of pathetic surrender, Marcus's mind was already 3 steps ahead. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the situation was far from over. This required a transition from warrior to professional, from force to procedure. His training didn't end with the fight. It encompassed the critical aftermath. "On your stomach. Now! Arms behind your back," Marcus commanded, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. The man complied instantly, sobbing with relief that he wasn't going to be next, scrambling to press his face against the warm concrete. Marcus retrieved a heavy-duty zip tie from a junk drawer in the garage, a leftover from securing gear, and efficiently secured the man's wrists. He then moved to the unconscious form of the other assailant, rolling him onto his stomach with a grunt of effort and securing his hands as well. He checked the man's airway with a clinical dispassion, ensuring he was breathing steadily and not in immediate medical danger, but offered no other comfort. His breathing, unlike the terrified gasps of the conscious imposter, was already steady and even. His heart rate was coming down from its combat peak. This wasn't about revenge or rage. That cold fire had been extinguished the moment the threat was eliminated. This was now about justice, accountability, and ensuring these men could never again terrorize another family on another sunny afternoon. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements deliberate and calm. He dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice answered. Yes, I need to report an assault and attempted robbery at my residence, Marcus said, his voice remarkably level. He gave his address. 2 male suspects impersonating HOA officials assaulted my wife and then attacked me. Both suspects are currently restrained on my property. One is unconscious but breathing. No other threats are present. He answered the dispatcher's follow-up questions with crisp, military precision. Descriptions, weapons, none seen, his name. He was the picture of a composed, responsible reporting party. He then went to Lena, who was standing by her rose bushes, trembling slightly. He wrapped her in a firm embrace, not saying a word, just holding her, letting her feel his solid, steady presence. He guided her to a porch step, sat her down, and fetched a glass of water and a bag of frozen peas for her cheek. Every action was measured, caring, and focused on stabilizing the situation. The wail of sirens grew in the distance, and soon the street was filled with the flashing red and blue lights of several police cruisers. Officers approached cautiously, hands on their holsters, assessing the scene. One man zip-tied and crying on the ground, another unconscious and similarly restrained, a calm, imposing man standing protectively near a woman holding a frozen bag to her face. Marcus immediately raised his empty hands in a non-threatening manner. "I'm the homeowner who called it in," he stated clearly. "The restrained men are the suspects. My wife is the victim of their assault." The real police officers, professionals themselves, quickly ascertained the truth. Their initial tension eased as they took in Marcus's calm demeanor and the clear evidence of the scene. They took statements, their eyebrows rising as Lena, her voice growing stronger, detailed the attempted extortion and the slap. Marcus gave his account, sticking strictly to the facts. The verbal harassment, the physical assault on his wife, the attempted punch, and his single defensive strike to neutralize the threat. But the true arbiter of justice was technology. Marcus directed them to the doorbell camera. The footage was crystal clear and damning. It captured the entire event in high-definition video and audio. The men's aggressive posturing, their demands for cash, Lena's polite but firm requests for ID, the escalation, the vicious slap, Marcus's emergence, the failed punch, and the swift, precise response. It was all there, an unbiased witness that erased any doubt. The men were roused, read their rights, and placed in handcuffs with official metal ones replacing the zip ties. They were arrested on a slate of charges: assault, battery, attempted robbery, and criminal impersonation of law enforcement or public officials. The unconscious man, now groggy and concussed, was checked by EMTs before being transported to the station. The police sergeant on scene, a grizzled veteran, closed his notebook after reviewing the footage one more time. He looked at Marcus, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Mr. Williams, based on the evidence, particularly the video which clearly shows the suspect assaulting your wife and then taking a swing at you, this is a clear case of self-defense and defense of others. Your actions were proportionate and occurred during the continuous commission of a felony. There will be no charges against you." He wasn't just a husband who had fought back. He was a citizen who had stopped a crime, secured the scene, and provided irrefutable evidence. His calm, professional conduct after neutralizing the threat was as important as the action itself. It painted a picture for the authorities not of a brawler, but of a protector who had done exactly what was necessary and nothing more. The system, presented with such a clear narrative, worked as it should. The bullies were in custody, and the defenders were in the clear, their sanctuary, though violated, now officially and legally reaffirmed. The story didn't just spread through the community, it ignited it. But the flames carried a surprising message. It wasn't recounted as a simple, brutal tale of violence. It was shared, from kitchen tables to online neighborhood forums, as a parable about the power of standing up to bullies. The details, the Navy SEAL, the single punch, the doorbell camera, made it viral, but the core message gave it weight and meaning. People weren't just sharing a news story, they were sharing a feeling of vindication. In the days that followed, a remarkable thing happened. The arrest of the two imposters acted like a key turning in a long-locked door. Families up and down Elmwood Avenue and in the neighboring streets began to come forward. An elderly couple on the corner confessed the men had threatened them over a non-existent fence violation, intimidating them into paying a fine in cash. A young single mother across the street came to Lena's door, tearfully thanking her. The same men had harassed her weeks prior, but she'd been too afraid to report it, fearing no one would believe her. The Williams' courage had given them their own. The local police, armed with this new wave of testimony, built an ironclad case of systematic extortion and intimidation. The community, once a collection of isolated houses, began to coalesce, forming a watch group and establishing better channels with the real HOA and local law enforcement. The predators had sought to exploit isolation, but their actions had instead forged a stronger, more connected community. For Marcus and Lena, the incident left a complex legacy. The sharp fear of that day slowly faded, but it was replaced by a more nuanced, sober understanding. Their safe haven had been violated, a painful reminder that the shadows of prejudice and intimidation could reach even the sunniest, most manicured lawns. They understood that they had been targeted not just as homeowners, but who they were. A successful black family that someone had assumed could be cowed and exploited. That knowledge was a bitter pill. But that pain was counterbalanced by a profound reinforcement of their strength as a couple. In the aftermath, they talked for hours, processing the fear, the anger, and the relief. Lena saw not just a warrior in her husband, but the protector in his purest form, the man who could channel a lifetime of discipline and training into a single, precise act to defend her. And Marcus saw in his wife not a victim, but a partner of immense courage, who had stood her ground with words until words were no longer an option. The incident became another thread in the tapestry of their marriage, a stark reminder of what they were willing to do for one another. Marcus, the warrior who had faced down enemies in distant, war-torn countries, had protected his home front with the exact same unwavering principle: defend what you love. The battlefield was different, but the mission was identical. He had brought the war home not as a curse, but as a shield. This story, and we must be very clear about this, is not about glorifying violence.
It is about the profound and universal right to self-defense. It is about the moment a predator, accustomed to preying on the vulnerable, discovers too late that they have chosen a protector as their prey. It's about the natural consequence of violence meeting its match in disciplined defense. It dismantles the illusion that bullies are invincible, revealing them as the cowards they are when faced with true resolve. At its heart, this is a story about the sanctity of home. It's about the fundamental right to feel safe behind your own door, to tend your garden in peace, and to exist without fear of intimidation. It's about the courage it takes to defend that right, whether that courage is found in speaking up, recording a crime, or when left with no other alternative, physically stopping a threat. It serves as a powerful, enduring reminder to those who would bring malice to another's doorstep. You never know who is on the other side of the door. You never know what strength you might be awakening, what line you might be crossing, or what quiet protector is waiting in the shadows, ready to stand for what is right. What are your thoughts? This story touches on themes we don't often talk about: feeling safe in our communities, the duty to protect our families, and how to respond when that safety is violated. Have you or someone you know ever experienced intimidation in your own neighborhood? What's the line between being a good neighbor and standing your ground? How can communities better protect themselves from this kind of predatory behavior? I believe these are conversations worth having. Share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. Let's learn from each other. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, then show this video some love, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that explore the real moments that define us. Thanks for watching.